A rivalry renewed. One team is holding on to an outside chance that they can make a run and potentially be in Arlington like the expectations were before the season. Another team is just trying to salvage their season with a big upset victory on the road. It's Locked On Horned Frogs and Locked On Utes, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs. And in the box next to me, if you're watching on YouTube, Locked On Utes host, JT Wistersill. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's also on your favorite podcast platform. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. We'll talk more about them later on. But JT, I talked to you this summer, and at the time, I would say Utah fans were understandably really confident about jumping in the new Big 12. So it hasn't gone exactly as planned so far. They're 1-2 in conference play. I guess first off, is this as simple as you've had an unintended QB carousel because of injuries to Cam Rising? Is like that really the reason why this is off the rails? Or are there other things about this team that you thought would be better, you had higher expectations for, that haven't played out so far this season?
Absolutely the latter. There have been things with this Utah team that haven't gone to pass. I would still say the biggest thing has been just Cam's injury and his inability to get back to full health. When Cam Rising was last healthy with this Utah football team, they averaged 38 points per game. If Utah was doing that, they would still be undefeated. So even with the defense that is performing under the expectations we had for them, if the offense had gotten back to that level with even better weapons, I would say, on paper than going into that 22 season. And we know what Dalton Kincaid became and everything, but like getting Dorian Singer, having a group of backs that you're excited about, it's become just Micah Bernard. But there was a lot of reason to think, and this schedule with the way it lined up, there was a lot of reason to be really excited about this Utah team. And what won out in college football for the last few years, it's been experience. There's a lot of players on this Utah team that won the 2021 Pac-12 championship. So when you have that much conference championship winning experience and the rest of the league doesn't, that's why we were really high on this Utah team. But when you lose your starter in Cam Rising, Utah has absolutely mismanaged their quarterback room, I can say for sure. When you have, because a true freshman, Isaac Wilson, has been forced to be this team's backup. That's not an ideal situation. Wilson has done some nice things. He's come along. Quarterback room is the biggest reason this team has underperformed so far. But the defense is also, you look at some of the missed tackles last week against Arizona State, and they've had some injuries on that side of the ball too. They were down 3 starters in the front 7. So that's where this is maybe a bigger conversation where Utah needs to look at things from a strength and performance standpoint, or just whatever they're doing. Like, why do players keep getting hurt in another season? But every college team has injuries, so I'm not trying to make an excuse for that. But yeah, this Utah team, their defense has been a little worse than expected. Still done some nice things. They haven't allowed 30 yet in a game on the season, and they are extremely one-dimensional. Micah Bernard's fantastic, but because of their inability at times to throw the ball, they made plays through the air, but have also struggled at times the second half against Arizona. That's why this team is underperforming and now finds themselves in a position where I really like your open, where you said Utah can still make a run to Arlington. They can if they go undefeated, because they would have head-to-head wins against BYU and Iowa State. They get both those teams at home too. There's still a world where their schedule will allow them to do that, especially with Wilson improving week after week. But this is not where I thought this Utah team would be by the time we're doing this crossover. Injuries to Cam Rising, so the bad quarterback play, and then the defense inconsistencies at times have led Utah to this spot.
So I want to get to the game itself, but I did want to ask one big picture question, because when Cam went down with the injury, and I know Kyle Whittingham said indefinite, it sounds like it's probably season.
Oh, he's out for the season now. Yeah, that became confirmed. He's out for the season.
Well, that's good to know. But I noticed, I think it was Jamal Anderson today, the former Utah running back, who was like, listen, it's funny to see this, JT, and part of it's just like the new world of college football, where you think about, like, you kind of have a salary cap, right? You have limited resources. You have roster management now, and that's tough on these coaches. But it is a possibility that he could come back for year 8. And I know the last 2 years have been super frustrating, I'm sure, for him more than anybody. But bottom line is, like, it's been tough with the shuffling and just kind of the vague nature of how they've talked about this. I'm sure that's super frustrating for people that follow this team. If you're making this decision, I guess what kind of goes into it, as far as, do you say, hey, if you want to come back, man, like, we'd love to have you? Or is it kind of that moment where you say, I feel like both of us would be better off if we went our separate ways here, and we had a clear direction for the future of this program at that spot.
Rising is one of the best Utes to ever play in the modern era. You can maybe even make an argument he's on the Mount Rushmore for Utah football players. But he did that 2 years, got into the Pac-12 championships, then making Rose Bowl appearances. Hadn't been done. It was awesome. It was incredible. There is no way that Utah and Cam Rising run it back for a year 8, in my opinion. I'm not going to sit here and act like I have sources, but I'm just going to say the last 2 seasons, in part, Utah has failed to achieve their goals, and we'll see how this year goes. But because of the health of Cam Rising, they have not set themselves up for success at the quarterback position because they banked on him and he hasn't been able to stay healthy. I'm not blaming Cam for that. It's just a fact. He's one of the most injury-prone players I've ever covered. I can't imagine that Utah wants to go through this again. We already mentioned the modern age of college football. I don't see how in the world Cam would get the same amount of NIL money. He has proven to be way too injury-prone. I don't see Utah wanting him back. I can't see Cam wanting to come back and doing all this because honestly, it's in a way hurt his legacy. Like all time, he's fine, but like it's left such a sour taste in everyone's mouth. It's left frustrations with the program, having to just wait and see on this guy's health constantly. I cannot see a world where Cam Rising is back with Utah football in 2024. We love him for everything he's done, but time for a new chapter. You cannot continue to do this.
Well, I've got good news for you, JT. You talked about a one-dimensional offense. In the second half of the UCF game, Gus Malzahn figured out, you know what? I think if I don't throw the ball, I can have a lot of success just running on this TCU defense. Their opponents have picked up on that. Shout out to Jeff Grimes for not picking up on that in that Kansas game. We appreciate you, Jeff. Thank you for giving us some confidence for a week. You mentioned Bernard. He's having a great year just from a numbers perspective. I guess two-parter, like Isaac Wilson, what does he bring to the table? And is there a world where you see them just saying, hey, we're coming downhill at you. If you can stop it, you can stop it. But we're not going to take a lot of unnecessary risk and put this ball in the air a lot on Saturday night unless you force us into situations where that has to be the move.
Utah will let Wilson air it out a little bit. He's done positive things, as I mentioned. Yes, like he has 7 interceptions. He's had unfortunate picks. But as a true freshman often does over the course of the season, he has grown and gotten better for a career-high 280 yards against Arizona. And yeah, had his struggles in the second half, but also Utah became one-dimensional in that game. And that is not something, and that's where the offense needs to learn from that too. Wilson's failures are in part on him, in part on the play calling of Andy Ludwig, and in part on receivers not separating as frequently. And that's where if I'm Utah, I'm really not trying to make things overly complicated in this game. I'm doing a lot. If I'm going to throw the ball, it's mostly going to be off play action, RPO type of things where the reads are guys I know can consistently get open in Dorian Singer, who's having a pretty strong season now that the offense has started to utilize him, the former Arizona receiver, USC, now at Utah. Brant Keithy, I still believe, is one of the best tight ends in college football, too. I expect Utah to utilize those guys in the passing game, but Utah should really make life easy on Wilson. And how you do that? You run the ball. Micah Bernard's fantastic. Micah Bernard by himself currently has more rushing yards than TCU does as a team. This offensive line for you, this offensive line.
You didn't have to do that to me, JT. That was unnecessary.
I'm sorry.
It's true. You're totally right.
That was just one of the numbers that popped out to me when I was prepping for this game was and Micah coming into the season. We didn't know if Micah would be RB1. He's been with this team for a long time. He was on the roster all the way back to 2019. He's one of those veterans, but man, he's having one heck of a year right now. If it wasn't for Taj Brooks, he'd probably be considered the best back in this conference, at least for what he's done in 24 so hard. The amount of missed tackles he's been able to generate, like other running backs will come in for Utah, and it looks completely different than when Micah Bernard's in the game because of Micah's just contact balance, and he had a heck of a game against Arizona State. He's been Utah's best. Honestly, I think I might even say overall player through these first few weeks of the season. And this offensive line, it was young, and they've come along really nicely. You look at what they did against Arizona State. I was very impressed by their play and the ability to generate open up rushing lanes too. So Wilson will air it out a little bit if he does too much. And it's unrealistic to honestly think he won't turn it over at least once in this game. Just that's because what his track record shows. But Utah's mindset should be Kyle Whittingham wants this team to be physical and aggressive. And that means, and really run the ball. Don't risk turning it over. I think Utah's going to try to run it as much as they can. They got to balance and not give it to Micah 40 times to wear him down too much, but they got to feed the best player on their offense. That's Micah. Wilson can do some things through the air, mostly because of those couple talented playmakers he has on the outside, and his arm strength has gotten better. His comfort in the offense has gotten better, but the biggest thing will be Utah trying to run it on a TCU team that I do believe, Stephen, I think you guys rank outside the top 100 in rush defense currently.
Yes, they are. They're struggling there for sure. And
yeah, you're 106. Your rush defense is currently, and you're allowing 180 yards on the ground currently.
Yeah, I've never been a math guy, but I know that's not good. Even with my 2.6 GPA as a sports broadcasting major, I know that's a pretty high number when we talk about FBS teams. Yeah, that's a funny thing too, and I won't belabor the point too much, but you talk about Isaac Wilson turning the ball over and throwing picks. TCU is like almost last in the country in turnover margin too, so it's kind of the stoppable force versus the movable object. But I want to get to the defense before we kind of switch gears here. You talked about it's been a little bit maybe worse than you expected. I guess just kind of your overall assessment of that unit, because from a numbers perspective, it looks pretty solid, JT, but I know that's what they've hung their hat on under Kyle Whittingham for a long time.
Hey, you are a numbers guy. There you go. Looked at the Utah defense numbers. I appreciate that. Utah still has the 17th ranked total defense in college football, which might come as a surprise to some Utah fans. 22nd in passing yards allowed per game at 172, but their run defense at times is what's been disappointing. I think the biggest thing about Utah's run defense is it's not like play after play they get gashed. It's like the big runs that Scadaboo had, where 2 plays in a row, it's like the worst tackling you've ever seen from a Utah defense that consistently executes a lot better. They really miss Correne Reed. He's one of their inside linebackers, was projected to be one of the best linebackers in college football by Pro Football Focus. Also, they are still missing their top pass rusher. I know Van Fillinger has been really good. Connor O'Toole was supposed to be that guy for them. And Keanu Tanavas is a D tackle. So those 3 players down in your front 7 is why this defense has struggled at times for Utah. But overall, they have put this, like against Arizona, yes, they allowed 23 points, but that's still that's Noah Fafita, that's Tetero McMillan. That should still be enough for you to win at home. The Arizona State game, that's where you got to be better tackling in those spots, but there was still plenty of opportunities for Utah to win it. They turned Arizona State once over on downs on a key 4th down stop. In the first half, they got an interception too. Like they've made plays and the offense hasn't been able to capitalize. So Utah defense is still good. I like the players they have in their secondary. It's a young group, and TCU's got some nice receivers too. So you guys are going to make plays through the air in this game. You'll move the ball downfield, but the question is then, can Hoover be the one who avoids the turnover, right? We mentioned Wilson's turnovers. Hoover has 6 on the season. And the thing that makes me nervous for you guys is I mentioned the rushing yards differential. One-dimensional against a Utah defense is not always ideal. And yes, this Utah run defense, they've struggled to tackle in some spots like that, but it's still such a talented group and they're playing at home. Rice-Eccles Stadium is still one of the toughest places to play in this conference. That loss to Arizona that Utah had was their first loss to an unranked opponent since all the way back in 2017 is where you have to look to. So this is a Utah team that doesn't lose at home very often. They've been getting chewed out all week by the coaches. They've heard all the media saying everything. They've been a talented team. You look at what they did against Oklahoma State. I know the Cowboys are struggling, but that was still that game was like 19-3 for a lot of it when it was really close until some garbage time points by Oklahoma State. It's a talented Utah defense. They just got to clean up a couple lapses, and I think they can get right back to being one of the best in college football. Heck, they're still the 2nd best defense in the Big 12. Statistically.
Yeah, they are. I mean, and as you said, they've kept people under 30 points all season long. When we come back, TCU coming off a bye week. What are they going to look like? We'll discuss that here coming up on Locked On Horned Frogs, Locked On Utes, your team every day. No matter who you root for, I think we can all agree we like making money, right? If you're a sports nerd, sports sicko, which you probably are because you're listening to a daily college football podcast, why not turn your hobby into something where you can make a little cash? That's where FanDuel comes in. Download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com. They still got that great deal going on right now where you make one $5 bet, you get $200 in bonus bets. It's a great return on your investment. That Utah TCU line, Utah getting 4.5 points over under is 49.5 between these two teams. So it should be a fun matchup at Rice-Eccles Stadium on Saturday night. You can bet on that game, the whole college football slate, and it's a great time to be a sports fan. MLB playoffs are going on. NFL's in full swing. NBA will be here before we know it. College basketball around the corner, too. It's all available there at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Again, one $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets. FanDuel, check it out today. All right, JT, put me in the hot seat here, and let's fire away.
All right. I want to know, first of all, you guys have the 8th best pass defense, which I found very interesting. You're only giving up 155 yards per game. How much of that is good secondary play versus we already talked about how much success teams have had running the ball on TCU?
I think a good portion of it is the run aspect of things. I will say Lamarian James is a corner that came over from Old Dominion in the offseason. He's done some nice things. He's very physical. I think he's solid. Safety play has been decent in the pass game. I think from a run fit perspective, they struggled. But, Bud Clark's been around a long time. They got a young guy in Jamal Johnson they like. The other side at corner has been kind of an adventure. A name that you guys will recognize, Jatravis Broughton, who had a really good opening game against Eric Omenor from Stanford, who's coming off a really good season with one of the more productive receivers in the country. He was locked up one-on-one against him in a lot of instances. I thought he played super well. And I kind of came away from that ball game thinking, man, this guy could be like a big-time starter for them all year long. Since then, he's struggled a lot. And I think his confidence has suffered for it. Now, they shuffled things around a little bit in the last few weeks. They've given Channing Canada some more reps. I would think as the season goes on, they might rotate even more. They got Javon McIver back this week, who's a guy that hasn't played a lot, but he's healthy for the first time all season. So I think it's kind of by committee. And they've been formidable at times, but honestly, JT, like when teams have wanted to take deep shots, they've had some success against one-on-one coverage. I think more than anything, it's just if you can run the ball effectively, there's no real reason to get away from that. And so they've given up some big plays there, and there just hasn't been a real reason to air it out. And they've also, UCF with Gus Malzahn, they're going to run the ball. SMU made a change at quarterback with Kevin Jennings. That's what they do. Kansas and then Houston last week. Like they faced a lot of teams that's their identity and that's what they're about. I think that'll continue in this matchup against Utah this week.
And you mentioned the deep shots. That is something we talked a little bit about Dorian Singer in the first segment. Him and Wilson have connected on a couple of those throughout the season because Singer, just being the prolific receiver he is, he can go up top and track the football with success. So that's something that could pose a problem for TCU in this game. But I mentioned Wilson's turnovers, and that's something he's got to be disciplined about too and not test some of those veteran defensive backs. I totally forgot about the JT Broughton revenge aspect in this game. The guy who's experienced a lot of success with Utah, transferred is from Texas, so transferred back home to play with TCU for this season. And hope to see him out there a lot in terms of just going against him. He's a talented player, but like you mentioned too, had some of those struggles. So we'll see how it goes from that angle too. Flipping over to the other side of the ball, then, Hoover has had some impressive numbers on the season, but we mentioned some of the turnovers too. How much of TCU is their struggles to run the ball versus just their desire to constantly air it out?
It's a mix of both. I will say, the last couple of weeks they've run the ball somewhat better. Now the Houston game was kind of hard to get a read on it because they got behind early and they were sort of in a situation where they had to air it out. Now, what Kendall Briles, the OC, has done that I think has been effective is instead of forcing the run at times, they've gotten really creative in the short passing game and the screen game with some of their motion stuff and the RPO aspect of the offense to allow them some high percentage throws. I think that's where Josh has excelled the most. But, this aerial attack is pretty potent. Like Jack Bech is having a great season. Eric McAllister's a transfer who was doing some nice things, wasn't really targeted much in the Houston matchup, but overall has been solid for them. Savion Williams is a fourth-year guy that's having a good season, especially in the red zone. He's a big physical wide receiver. And I think Josh, the thing with Josh, a lot of these turnovers in my mind have been he presses too much. Like if the team gets behind and it's like, all right, we're down 2 scores, it feels like he's trying to get it all back in one play instead of taking what the defense gives him, getting those long methodical drives. So he's had some issues reading safeties over the top, not seeing guys, maybe putting too much air on the ball and allowing them to come underneath and cut it up. But I'm very curious to see, JT, what they do coming off the bye week. Do they try to scheme this up a little bit better and maybe get some cheap yards that way? And then what wrinkles do they have in this passing attack? Because what Houston did effectively, and I know Kyle Whittingham sees this, they rushed 3 or 4 pretty much all game. They were dropping 7 or 8 back, and they basically said, listen, if you're going to get on the ground, go ahead. But we're not going to allow you to just sit in the pocket and make those short and intermediate passes you've been living on. And TCU really struggled to get into a rhythm. And then they got behind, and they were kind of in a situation where they had to throw the ball. So I think that'll be a big chess match. But Josh Hoover's been better than I expected. I think going into the year, I thought like he was maybe kind of a placeholder quarterback. Now I feel like he's probably your guy for the foreseeable future. And this back half of the season is going to be big for him and continuing to prove that throughout the last 6 games.
Do you think for Coach Sonny Dykes, do you think how does this game go along for him? And it's so interesting, right? Made the national championship game, but do you feel like, is he on the hot seat? Does he have is this a bad look if this does get out of hand? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I do expect TCU to hang around. I obviously, look, I think Utah's going to win the game. I think they're going to cover the spread. I do think in the end, Utah wins by 10 plus. But like, let's say something happened where it turned into like a 15 to 20 point blowout. How does that relate then to Coach Dykes' hot seat?
It doesn't help. I think he's definitely – I mean, he's in the crosshairs with the fans. Jeremiah Donati, the athletic director, I feel like in a perfect world, he would want to give him another year to kind of see like if they can build on this. Can they close the season strong? The issue for Sonny is I think there's – from what I've heard and from what I can gather, there are boosters that were really loyal to Gary Patterson, and it was time to move on, but they weren't exactly thrilled about it. And they don't have the type of – they don't have the same relationship with Coach Dykes. He's been there 2.5 seasons, and Gary was here for 2 decades. And so that loyalty's not there. I think if this game gets out of hand, then they'll play Tech at home. So if this one gets out of hand and then they lose to Tech pretty handily, then some alarm bells are going off. And I feel like in that scenario, I wouldn't imagine them to make a move midseason, but in the world we live in now, JT, with early signing day and everything else, like if you're going to make a change, in some ways you're sort of pressured to do it, in the middle of the year. So that would be bad. I think a win would be huge if they're able to stay in it and make it like a 1-score game and they're playing effectively, and that's big too. But right or wrong, I still think there's going to be a subset of people, especially if they lose big, they're like, how are you going to go, even with it being a tough place to play, Utah being a great program, how are you going to go on the road and just get waxed by a true freshman quarterback who's making his, third or fourth career start? That's not a great look, and it wouldn't reflect well on, the toughness and leadership of this team.
And once again, I'm not saying that's going to for sure happen, but Look, games have gotten out of control in Bryce-Eccles Stadium before. Last year when Arizona State came out there, and Arizona State last year's team was worse, I think, than this year's like TCU team is currently. But that game became 55-3. Like it just really got out of hand. Utah's defense was thriving. It was really loud in Rice-Eccles Stadium. The altitude is something you have to reckon with out here. And it's just one of those games where it's like, whoa, night game at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and this one spirals out of control. And look, Utah is still a team that I still think at the end of the season, when we look at their wins and losses, Arizona State, I don't expect those to be bad losses. And they were in those games versus we mentioned TCU, the blowout against SMU. We look at the loss against Houston. It's a bad loss. There's no way around it. So this is going to be a very interesting game. And it's going to be curious to see how it plays out for both sides angles. On the last thing I'll say on Coach Dykes is just wild to think that like you made the national championship game a couple years ago. But it does feel like the seat is hot because of how the last 2 years have gone. Not getting bowl eligible last year after you make the national championship game is wild to fathom. Uphill battle to do so again currently right now. And both these teams in really important season defining games, and Utah gets it at home and TCU has to travel out to a very daunting place to play. Utah's playing not up to their standard right now, true freshman quarterback, like we mentioned, but I do not think it's an ideal matchup for TCU based on the things we've already discussed so far.
Yeah, I want to get the keys to the game in a second, but I think you're right. And I feel like right on a lot of those things. Going back to TCU and kind of expectation-wise, missing a bowl would be really disappointing. Right or wrong, with the departure of Texas and OU, there was really nobody on the schedule besides like Utah on the road at the beginning of the season that you were just like, man, there's a huge disparity here. Like there's probably no way TCU's favored in this game. And I think like there's a lot of coin flip games in the mix too, which makes things trickier. But bottom line is you feel like with this roster, you should find a way to get to 6-6. And to do that, you got to win 3 more games. So, that'll start with a matchup with Utah on Saturday night. We'll come back and keys to the game and final predictions here on Locked On Horned Frogs, Locked On Utes, your team every day. One of our new sponsors is Hims. You can go to hims.com/lockedon to start your free trial today. Guys who feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom, it's time to stop worrying about your performance and get Hims so you can feel confident knowing that you can do what you need to do when the time comes. Hims is a changing men's healthcare provided with access to affordable health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Comfortable doctor visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. It prescribes your medication, ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Again, that's hims.com/lockedon. Hims, try it out today. All right, JT. So I know based on kind of what you said so far, you're expecting a Utah win. If it's going to play out, like what's the script? What are the things the Utes have to do to take care of business and come away with a victory in this one?
Absolutely has to establish the run early in this game. When they became one-dimensional in the second half and they fell behind against Arizona, we saw Isaac Wilson really struggle. Now, I will say once again, Isaac Wilson's now had a couple weeks of practice under his belt. Each week he's gotten better. I think that Isaac will play better in this game than he did against Arizona. But I don't think Utah will need him to make crazy play after crazy play because I do think Micah Bernard is going to have a really good game. He's just elevated to being a captain on this team. He's averaging 6 yards per carry. He's one of the top backs in college football currently. And Micah has just been really hard to bring down. It's the Utah offensive line that's playing well. This Utah team has lost 2 games in a row now. It's been a long time since they've done that. It's been an even longer time since they've lost 3 in a row, especially back-to-back games to unranked opponents at home. I haven't looked at how far back that goes. It goes incredibly far back. And as we mentioned, outside of just the history of why this is challenging, because once again, Rice-Eccles Stadium, night game, it's going to be loud and it's tough to win and play when that altitude. You see teams wear down a lot in the second half because of that. This is a Utah team that all week long has been getting chewed out for their defensive performance. I expect this team to tackle better consistently. There is also not a back or even a player in general, no offense to TCU, just like the caliber of what Scadaboo is currently doing right now. So it's a one-dimensional TCU team that I don't think is going to have a lot of success running the ball because I do think Utah is going to dominate the trenches in this game. TCU will make some plays through the air, but knowing Hoover, he's probably going to turn it over a time or two as well, and that could end up being the difference. And Wilson might turn it over as well, but I don't trust TCU to consistently move the ball versus I do feel like Utah will be able to do consistently on the ground. And then the playmakers, like we talked about, Dorian Singer, Brant Keithy, those are guys that can consistently win on the outside. And I expect them to do so against TCU. So I think Wilson will play fine. Makai's going to have a big game on the ground. This is a Kyle Whittingham-led team. Their season is really on the line. They had a players-only meeting. They're fired up. They know what they need to do. They've been close in their games. They haven't been blown out by either Arizona or Arizona State. They've been in both those games and had plays to win it even entering the fourth quarter. They just didn't make them. I have confidence in this team. I think Andy Ludwig, Utah's offensive coordinator, is going to tweak some things too to make it better. And I do expect Utah to win this game.
So on the TCU side of things, I definitely think there's a path to victory here. You talked about the issues running the ball, and that's real. They have had a ton of success throwing it, though, and despite their issues running the ball, they've been really efficient in the red zone this season, and they found ways to get guys open and score touchdowns when they have to. I feel like you have to start fast. You're coming off a bye week. You're on the road. You want to try to take the crowd out as much as you can. You mentioned Isaac Wilson, the turnover problem. Put them in predictable passing situations as much as you can. Force those turnovers. Force him to try to beat you. I think for Andy Avalos, this has to be a week where you say, hey, we're going to sell out to stop Bernard. And if the true freshman quarterback beats us over the top, then that's just kind of something we're going to have to live with. And then protecting the ball, playing a clean game. All that being said, I think this is a close football game. I just feel like it's a tough matchup because I really believe if they're going to win, and I'm talking about TCU, obviously, they're going to have to score frequently on this good defense and force Isaac Wilson, that offense, to continually answer the call, keep that game close. And it sort of has become a shootout, which is just not how Utah plays, and that's not how they played this season. So I think in the end, I'll take the Utes 27-21. And yeah, I feel like TCU still has a lot of questions to answer. I feel like they played better after the bye week, but that's where I'm at right now. JT, any other final thoughts? Then let us know where to find you on YouTube or podcast platform and where we can follow Locked On Utes.
Fun to have this rivalry renewed. Big picture. This is one of the best things about Utah joining the Big 12, getting to play TCU again. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to go 31-17. I think TCU, once again, they will make plays in this game, but I do feel like Utah will consistently drive the field. Utah's had their red zone issues, but I do think those are things that with Wilson's continued growth, as well as Micah Bernard's continued emergence, and just Utah It's a trust in this team over the history of what they've been able to do. They've been close in these games. I expect them to find the difference, and I do feel like they are clearly a better team than TCU based on what we've seen so far. So that's why I'm leaning Utah 31-17 in this game. But once again, excited to play the Horned Frogs. Going to be fun in Salt Lake City, the first in this new renewed rivalry that's going to get underway. You guys can follow me at Locked On Utes, at JT Wistersill as well. Steven, a lot of fun jumping on with you, man.
Thanks, man. And yeah, that's Saturday night, 9:30. So late post game shows for JT and I, which will be fun. But win, lose, or draw, we'll be covering it, baby. So follow me on Locked On Horned Frogs or at Simcox Steven on Twitter. It's Locked On Utes and Locked On Horned Frogs, and it's your team podcast.